Hey, Year 10. So last week we were looking at planning an essay. So logically, we're going to go and actually have a go at writing a comparison essay. Don't forget that anything you send to me, I will comment on and I will send back to you. For this particular piece of work, I would really, 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 really appreciate it if you guys could actually type it and attach it to a show my homework or email it to me if you're absolutely unable to use show my homework or such one as it's now called, to put it on there. But what I've now found I can actually do is that I can now make comments on a piece of Word document and type those up for you and then send them straight back to you, which makes my life a lot easier and actually gives you masses of feedback. Okay, so my email address will be on the homework, on show my homework. Or as I said, please, 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 if you can type it for me, that would be brilliant. Okay, thank you. So today we're going to be writing a comparison essay and we're looking at how do we go from a plan to a finished piece. So let's start off with a little bit of a quiz. So I've got 5 questions on the board for you there. All I want you to do is pause the video now and answer the questions. So what does Janet Weir do aside from write poetry? That's about the poet of poppies. Where is Beirut? You should know that from War Photographer. What is the name of the soldier in remains? What does kamikaze mean? And this last one is just a little bit of trivia. What do Simon Armitage, Carol Ann Duffy and Ted Hughes and Wordsworth and Tennyson all have in common? Okay, so pause the video now and answer those questions. Okay, so the questions. What does Janet Weir do aside from write poetry? She is a textiles artist, which is massively important when we're looking at poppies, because she is always using that textiles language, that domestic language. Where is Beirut? Beirut is in Lebanon. Still has some conflict going on today, as far as I'm aware, but it was a massive conflict during the 1980s. What is the name of the soldier in remains? His name is Rob. And if you've watched the video, I really, 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 really say watch the video, They're Not Dead. You'll get to hear his voice a lot more. What does kamikaze mean? Kamikaze means divine wind or tempest. Divine meaning from God. Tempest is a storm, it's a divine storm, really. It's a huge part of the poem Kamikaze, because if you haven't got that, what you end up with is basically the reason that the Japanese soldiers were doing it was because they felt that they were doing God's work, which links to an awful lot of other conflicts if you think about it. And then the last one, Simon Armitage, Carol Ann Duffy, Ted Hughes, Tennyson and Wordsworth, all poets that are in the poetry anthology, but they are also all poet laureates, meaning that they are employed by the Queen, by the King at the time, for Ted Hughes, Tennyson, Wordsworth, to in fact write poetry. Kind of useful to know. A little bit of trivia for you. Probably help you in a pub quiz in the future. And you'll be thinking, yes, thank you, Mrs. Joyce. Okay, so moving forward. So last time we took the question to pieces, rebuilt it in our own words. We chose a poem we were confident with and picked quotations that would show us how we felt about the question. And we should have created a plan of what, how, why, including context and reader interpretation. So this time what we're going to do is we're going to create a thesis statement which underpins our answer. Now, I know some of you may not have come across the term thesis statement before. It sounds scary. It really isn't. We're going to use our plan to construct a sample paragraph for our essay. We're going to consider how our comparison paragraphs link together and display a complete argument. And then we're going to think about how we summarize and create a solid conclusion. If you don't have your plan next to you now, I strongly suggest you go and get it. So pause the video and go and get it. Okay, so starting with thesis statements. So the first thing I want you to understand is what is a thesis statement. As I said, it sounds massively complicated. It's not, because it literally is the answer to your question. That's what it is. It is literally just your answer. Obviously, you have to extend it out and then we go into it in a bit more depth. But the idea is that this is your overarching statement that sits at the top of your essay that you then flow through into a little bit more detail. So literally, what do you think about the question? What do we know? What are you going to look at? And you can't really write your thesis statement until you've done your plan, because once you've got your plan, you can then start to make the links between each point that you've made. It's a great way to introduce your essay without going off topic or being really primary school about things. In this essay, I'm going to write about bleh. We don't want that, okay? You sound like a primary school assembly. I'm going to talk about today. You don't want to do that. You want to sound like an adult. The more sophisticated you sound in your essay, the better your marks will be. And it's a way to link your paragraphs together, and I'm going to show you how to use it later. And it's a way to round off your thinking in your final conclusion. A lot of you have said, Miss, do I need to write an introduction? Do I need to write a conclusion? If you've got a thesis statement, it's already done for you. You don't need to worry about it. So on we go. So writing your thesis statement. Okay, so this is our question. Compare how poets present war in Remains and one other poem. Don't know why I've got the extra set of speech marks there, probably because I can't type. However, what we're going to focus on here. Okay, so we need to think about how we're going to answer this question. So we have to make sure that we reference comparison in our thesis statement. So in the task, it's what we have to do. That doesn't mean we have to use the word compare. We could just talk about two poets or many poets and difference. That's all going to talk about comparison. Then we can be quite general at the beginning and then go into more specific discussion when we mention the poems we will be writing about, because it's said compare how poets present war, and then it's gone specific with Remains and one other poem. So we need to think very, very carefully about the generic ideas and then start going in a bit more specifically. And then finally, because we're being asked to talk about presenting, we need to think about the ideas that the poets talk about. We need to think about the poets' motives and how they have used one or two very specific methods to give us a presentation, give us some ideas, and then how that big method is pulled down into little methods. Okay, and to be quite frank, that is dependent on our second poem, because if we're comparing Remains with Bayonet Charge, for example, we're going to have a very, very different main overarching method that's been used by the two poets in comparison to how Remains might be with Kamikaze. Okay, so writing it. So because I have to be able to talk about two poems in order to write my thesis statement, I've chosen to write about poppies. Now, first of all, very, very odd of me to choose to write about poppies because I don't like it. It's not my favourite poem at all, but I do love Remains. But I've chosen to write about this because it fit quite nicely into what I wanted to talk about with Remains. You will have chosen other poems. Some of you have chosen poppies, some of you have chosen other poems. That is fine. Please do not change your poem of choice simply because I've chosen to write about poppies. Okay, so this is what I've written, and I'm going to break it down as to how I've written it. So I've started with my title, Compare How Poets Present War in Remains and One Other Poem. And then you have my thesis statement. Over the years, many poets have chosen to write about war and conflict. Whether from the perspective of soldiers, civilians, those in command, or those left behind, these poems present war in many different ways. Simon Armitage and Jane Weir have both written poems about modern conflict, but have approached this theme from very different perspectives. Armitage writing from the perspective of a real soldier, and Weir choosing to write from the perspective of a mother whose son has chosen to join the army. Okay, so let's see how this goes. So, my first section, the opening line, which introduces the topic. Okay, when we're talking about this, we need to think about what are we actually talking about. Okay, so I've been a little bit generic, but what I have done is I've mentioned perspective, which is what I want to talk about in my essay. I want to talk about how the perspectives, the narrators, the characters that these two poets have created show the ideas. Okay, then I've introduced my idea in a bit more detail. Simon Armitage and Jane Weir have both written poems about modern conflict, but have approached this theme from very different perspectives. And then I've drawn it out even further. So why are they different? Okay, now if you look at this, my comparison idea is there because I've talked about Simon Armitage and Jane Weir, and I have used the word different. Okay, so I'm talking about comparison. I am talking about perspective because that's my thesis comment. That's what I actually want to talk about. And I've introduced my topic very clearly. Okay. Now, what I would like you to do now is I would like you to look at your plan and I would like you to write your thesis statement now. It doesn't need to be in full detail like this. It can just literally be your answer. Okay, so one sentence that you can then expand out after this presentation. So write your thesis statement now. Okay, so coming back, let's have a look at our progress so far. So this is what we're planning on doing today. And so far we have created our thesis statement. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use our plan and our thesis statement to construct a sample paragraph for our essay. Now I'm going to write a sample paragraph for you. I'm going to talk you through it, and then what you are eventually going to do is you're going to use my sample, because this PowerPoint will also be available as a document on Show My Homework, to write your own. I do not want you to use my sample paragraph in your essay. Okay, I wrote it. I will be able to spot it if you copy it. Please write your own. Okay, so here we go. So first thing, I need my plan. Okay, and so this is a little bit of my plan that I wrote last time that I'm going to be focusing on. Now, it should be a complete plan. Currently, one class have only got 6 people who've done it. So get off your bottoms and write your flipping plan if you haven't done it already. I know that you're not going to have time to write a detailed plan in the final exam, but the whole purpose of this is to get you into the point where you can do it at speed. Okay, and if this exam question comes up, you'll be laughing all the way to the bank because you'll have it in your head already. Okay, that's the plan. That's the theory behind writing plans now. Write as many plans as possible, go into the exam, and you should be able to have one that's vaguely similar to the question in front of you. We need to remember what, how, why. What's been done, how has it been done, and why has it been done? We need to work through the stages of that what, how, why paragraph. For the purposes of this, I'm going in order, what, how, why, but once you are confident with it, you can start with your why, you can start with your how, you can start with your what. That's the purpose of it. It's to make it that little bit more fluid. And then we need to keep on coming back to that thesis statement. We need to be focused on that, because if we keep on coming back to it, we never go off topic. And of course, we need to chuck in our comparative and then do it all again with our second poem. Okay, so here we go. Have you got your plan that you were asked to pick up earlier? If you haven't written your plan, stop this now, go to my last one and write your smegging plan. Love you. Okay, so I write my paragraph. First of all, I am keeping my plan close. You will see I've got it in a little box up here. You should have it next to you. Do not attempt to write your paragraph without your plan next to you. You will need it. So here's my paragraph. The poem Remains shows us very clearly that war is a disturbing experience. From beginning to end, we are shown Rob's story and how his experiences in the army have caused major trauma and affected his life beyond his tour in Iraq. When he is home on leave, his every action is disturbed by it, dream, and he's torn apart. This violent imagery emphasizes his reaction to the death of the looter and implies that his mind has exaggerated the event to the point that the looter has become dehumanized and torn apart like a piece of clothing. This violence shocks the reader into feeling sympathy for Rob, as his experiences can never be left behind or recovered from. This further emphasizes the understanding that Rob is a real person, that his PTSD is still present. His experiences in the Gulf War will never leave him. So before I start going into actually how this breaks down into what, how, why, I just want to direct you to a couple of things. First of all, you will be able to see that I have literally pulled words from my plan into this. That's why I needed my plan. I originally had traumatizing experience here, but I changed it to disturbing because I wanted to use the word trauma down here, and it made the essay, the paragraph flow a bit better. You'll see violent imagery mentioned, and you'll see PTSD, the Gulf War, and sympathy. So they're all in there. So my plan is directly related to what I'm writing. So here we go. So the beginning, war is traumatizing, war is disturbing. Okay, my what? What has the poet shown us? And I've been really clear, shows us very clearly that war is a disturbing experience. Okay, I've then gone into a little bit more detail, talking about his tour in Iraq and talking about major trauma here, because I know I'm going to go on and talk about PTSD further down here. Then, my how. How has it been done? Now, you'll notice that I've actually pulled in some extra quotations in here. Home on leave, dreaming is torn apart, and then I've actually pulled it apart even further and talked about torn apart here. I've also talked about dehumanization as well as violent imagery, okay? I have developed my answer further. If you can use mini quotations like this peppered in, that's what we call judicious. And what that means is it shows the examiner that you know this poem really very, very well. So peppering those quotations in throughout your answer is brilliant. It's almost like they're mini quotations that further boost your understanding. Okay. And then finally, my why. So thinking about the context and effect on the reader. Now, in this case, they're actually very, very closely linked, because what we're supposed to do is feel sympathy for Rob and his PTSD. And also it shows us Simon Armitage's true meaning, which is experiences experienced in war can never be left behind or recovered from. Okay, so this emphasis on this shows us that Rob is a real person. Okay, and that's another point we want to make. Okay, when it comes to this poem, we have to keep on talking about the fact that this is a real person. This is an interview that has been turned into a poem. Okay, so his experiences in the Gulf War will never leave him. His PTSD is still present. Please don't bother explaining what PTSD is. PTSD is something your examiner will be familiar with. They don't expect you to give a psychoanalysis of what PTSD is. You just need to talk about it. Okay. Apologies if you can hear my children yelling in the garden. Welcome to working at home. Okay, so I'm not going to stop the video now and ask you to write your first paragraph. I am going to keep going, but you can have this running whilst you are writing your paragraph. Just make sure you fast forward through bits. Okay. So progress check, here we go. We've created our thesis statement and we've used our plan to construct a sample paragraph. We're now going to move on to the comparison. So how do we link them together? That's our big thing. Now remember, I've chosen poppies. Your choices are up to you. Please, please, please do not change your choice just because I've chosen to do something different from you. Okay, my ideas are my ideas. You are not being examined on how much you can remember of what Mrs. Joyce told you. You are being examined on what you think. And that's one of the best things about English literature. Okay, you can completely disagree with me if you want. So long as you can back yourself up, doesn't matter. So here we go. So we need to decide whether we're going to write about a similarity or a difference. Now, you should already have this in your plan. However, if you haven't, make sure you've got it really clear and obvious. You need to choose an appropriate comparative conjunction. This may sound stupid, but I've had so many people in the past say, however, the poet does this poet does exactly the same thing. Similarly, however, on the other hand, comparatively, they're really, 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 really important to get them right. And sometimes when you're in a rush, you panic and you forget. And not only that, you have to use a comparative conjunction, okay? If you just write two different essays, you're not going to get as good marks. You have to compare. Write your comparative paragraph in the same way as you wrote your first paragraph. You don't need to rewrite reinvent the wheel. You can do the same sorts of things. Use that what, how, why, and really push it through. And then make sure we're linking back to that initial thesis statement, because that's going to link the whole thing together into a holistic idea. Okay, so my comparative paragraph example. So you see, 2 paragraphs for the price of 1 this time. Similarly, Weir shows us the effects of war are far-reaching. However, the consequences of war we are shown here are far less direct. Instead of looking at specifics, she talks about the impact on families and shows us a mother who feels she has lost her son. My stomach busy making tucks, darts, pleats. This physical description of the way emotion affects her is directly linked to her role as a mother when Weir uses textiles language, darts, pleats, to describe the twisting of her stomach in response to her son's possible death. Throughout the poem, domestic language is juxtaposed with military terminology, reinforcements, implying that her son's military life will permanently change hers. Weir's message here is clear. War isn't just about soldiers. Those who are left behind are forever marked by its consequences. Okay, so same sort of idea. We're going to have to start, however, rather than with what, how, why, we're going to have to start with our comparative, because if we don't, we are left with 2 paragraphs that really don't make any sense next to each other. So to link them, we've got the word similarly. Now, I've been a bit odd here because I've said a similarity and then I've talked about why it's different. Okay, you can do that. Okay, because it's, remember our thesis statement we want to talk about, I'm talking about the perspectives, and the fact that they have perspectives makes them similar, but the perspectives they've chosen are different. So it links the two paragraphs together. You get higher marks for direct comparison. There is nothing stopping you from writing 3 paragraphs about poem A and then 3 paragraphs about poem B with the word however in the middle. However, that is going to cap your marks instead of using those direct comparisons. So poem A says this, however, poem B thinks that. It's almost like a boxing match where they have to face off against each other. Okay, so we've got our comparative conjunction. It's only one sentence, and we're moving straight into our what again? Okay, now you'll notice here that I have got my thesis statement in here. Looking at specifics, she talks about the impact on families, okay? Talking about her perspective. Because my thesis statement is about her perspective, despite the fact that I may not have mentioned the word perspective in here, I'm talking about the character, okay? And therefore, I'm talking about perspective. So therefore, I'm talking about my thesis statement. We've pulled the quotation apart, tucks, darts, pleats. I've referred to it as being textiles language, and I've talked about how it's been used to show emotion and how it's used to describe the twisting. I could have referred to it as a metaphor, but at this point, I'm not talking about metaphorical language. I'm talking about the textiles language specifically, okay? And the physical description. And then my why. Now, my why actually is very, very closely linked to my how as well. Okay. Throughout the poem, domestic language is juxtaposed. So I've got my how in there as well as my why. Sorry, I should have done it as 2 separate boxes, but it's all really intertwined. And this is how you get those high marks, by taking that what, how, why and punching it around and smushing it into different ways of doing things. So this is about the context and the poet's purpose together. Juxtaposition, talking about how it permanently changes her life. We've got we as message in here, which is to do with the context. Okay, and it's very, very clear that I know how this links to remains and my point. Okay, so you should have by now a rough idea how to do all 3 of these things. Again, I'm not going to stop and ask you to write your next paragraph, because you should hopefully be able to do this all together. Okay, so last thing, how we summarize and create a solid conclusion. Now, this is something that you guys ask me about all the smegging time. Okay, you're always asking me, do I need to write a conclusion? The fact is that if you don't finish and you run out of time, that conclusion is not as important as getting your ideas down. But if you have used your 45 minutes well and you've managed to get everything done, your final conclusion is short and sweet. Okay, so you obviously need to complete another 1 or 2 comparative paragraphs. Okay, 3 is the magic number. However, if you haven't got time to write 3 comparisons, okay, getting those comparative paragraphs in, making it detailed, is a lot better than a lot of little surface differences, okay? Rather than going, one poem says this, one poem says that, poem says this, poem says that. If you can go into real detailed comparison and think about the depth of your ideas, you are going to get a lot higher marks. So although 3 is the magic number, if you can only manage another 2 comparative paragraphs, you've got a lot of information there still, and that is perfectly fine. So concluding your essay doesn't need to be time consuming. It's literally a few sentences. You need to sum up your general points and refer back to your thesis statement. Again, coming back to this. If you've got that thesis statement at the beginning, your conclusion has pretty much written itself for you. And then you're done. It's that simple. Yeah. If it were that simple, miss, they'd give us all 9s. Okay, so here we go. So concluding. Please note here, I have my thesis statement. I have both written poems about modern conflict, but have approached this theme from very different perspectives. Nice and simple. And the reason that's up there is because I want to remember it, because when I'm writing my conclusion, I have to remember this, because if I don't, it's not going to make sense. It's not going to round off my essay, and it's not going to make it a complete piece. So here's my conclusion. Both poets use very different perspectives and voices to present war and the consequences of conflict. Whether using the experiences of a single soldier or the more general feelings of military families across the world, their work shows us very clearly that war and conflict cause more than just the immediate death and destruction involved in direct fighting. The consequences of hostilities are far-reaching and devastating. full stop, the end. You'll notice that I've used several different words that mean war in here. That's because otherwise it sounds really, really repetitive. Because it is effectively repeating the same thing a couple of times to really get the idea that we know what we're talking about. So both poets use very different perspectives and voices to present war and the consequences of conflict. Boom, baby, that's me referring back to my thesis statement. Look, it's almost identical. Different perspectives and voices. Done. Now, we could just stop there, but we want to flesh it out a little bit so that the examiner knows we know exactly what we're talking about. Developing my thesis statement to include more depth. This shows the examiner what I have learned whilst writing this essay. Nice and simple. And that's it. It's done. So, what you will need to do after this is you will need to set yourself a 45-minute timer and give yourself a go. Now, what I would like you to do is, I don't want you to stop at 45 minutes if you have still got things to write. What I'd like you to do is I'd like to put a star in the margin and write 45 minutes here, miss, so that you know how much you got written in that time. So we've done our 4 things, and now we're going to do our cool down. Okay, so got 3 things here I'd like you to do before you get started on that essay. First thing, I'd like you to write down 3 comparative phrases you're going to use. I'd like you to remind yourself what was your thesis statement again, write it out a couple of times, you won't forget it then. And then I'd like you to look at your plan. Add your thesis statement into each section of your plan. You will probably find it's already there. Okay, but if it isn't, just make sure you've got a little nod to it. So as I said, 45 minutes. Have your plan next to you, have your copies of the poem next to you. This is not a closed book test, and it's not a test. This is me seeing how much you have got from my work and also how much you've got from studying the poems at home by yourselves. Okay, 45 minutes. At the end of 45 minutes, just put a note somewhere, miss, this is how much I got done in 45 minutes, and then carry on if you haven't finished. If you finish before 45 minutes is up, tell me how much time you used. Okay, this is massively useful for me and for you. Heck, if you're interested in writing graphs, you can make yourself a flipping graph. This time I'll take 42 minutes. Next time I'll take 47 minutes. And you just focus it on it. Obviously, I'm hoping most of you are going to type this rather than handwrite it. But if you have to handwrite it, that's fine. This particular essay, you don't get any marks for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. But if I can't read it, I can't read it, and therefore I can't mark it. Submit your homework to me on Show My Homework, such a one. Okay. Submit it on Word if you can via Show My Homework, and I can send you back detailed, really, really detailed marking. Okay. And feedback. And that's the most important thing, feedback. Okay. I want you to use this as developmental. Think about what you did last time and how you can improve. If you've not written one of these before, look at it when you're finished. And even if you think, oh, that was rubbish, see whether you can work out what made it rubbish. So that way you can ask me questions and then I can answer them. I am going to be back at school when year 10 come back in. I would say the 8th of June. However, everything's up in the air again. So as soon as I know what's happening, you'll know what's happening. I'm hoping I'll see some of you. And let me know what you thought of this PowerPoint. Let me know what you thought of the work. Give it a go. And please let me know how you're doing. And I will see you soon. Bye, guys.